There's something quite strange that happens to certain individuals. They read a book and suddenly the world shifts. They learn a concept and can never again see things as they did before, and we celebrate this, don't we? This accumulation of knowledge, this expansion of understanding. But I want to propose something rather unsettling to you today. That knowledge itself, this very thing we've been taught to pursue relentlessly, might be the most effective prison you'll ever build for yourself. Now, I'm not speaking of ignorance being bliss in some simple-minded way. I'm not suggesting we should all stop learning or return to some primitive state. I'm speaking of something far more nuanced and far more troubling. The way that knowing too much can trap you in a cage made entirely of your own awareness. Have you ever watched a child play? Really watched them? They're completely absorbed, you see. They become the superhero, the princess, the explorer. There's no gap between themselves and the experience. No little voice in their head saying, "This is just pretend. This isn't real. You're wasting time." They're simply in it, fully, totally, without reservation. But then something happens. They learn. They discover that Santa isn't real, that stories are just stories, that grown-ups are playing roles too. And with each piece of knowledge, a little bit of that complete absorption dies. A little voice grows louder, commenting, analysing, comparing, judging. And here's where the imprisonment begins, because once you know certain things, you cannot unknow them, and more troubling still, each piece of knowledge you acquire adds another bar to your cell, another layer of separation between you and direct experience. Let me tell you what I mean. When you learn about cognitive biases, when you understand how memory distorts reality, when you discover that all perception is interpretation, something shifts. You can no longer trust your own experience in quite the same way. Every emotion becomes suspect, every memory questionable, every certainty revealed as possibly just another trick of the mind. Think of it this way. Before you knew about confirmation bias, you could simply believe things. But now every time you're certain about something, there's this voice. But am I only seeing the evidence that supports what I already believe? Am I trapped in a bubble of my own making? You learn about the Dunning-Kruger effect and suddenly you can't trust your own competence. Am I actually good at this? Or am I too incompetent to realise I'm incompetent? The first prison bar then is self-doubt. And I don't mean the healthy kind that keeps you humble. I mean the paralysing kind. The kind that makes every thought suspect, every feeling questionable, every decision a potential mistake waiting to be discovered. I once knew a man, we'll call him David, who consumed knowledge voraciously. Philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, history, sociology. He could explain why people behaved the way they did, why societies formed the structures they formed, why humans believed the things they believed. And you know what happened to him? He stopped being able to do anything. Not because he was lazy or afraid, but because he understood too much about the futility of most human endeavour. He knew that most relationships end. He understood that most businesses fail. He recognised that most beliefs are culturally conditioned. He saw that most achievements are forgotten within a generation. His friends would suggest things. Why don't you start that business? Why don't you ask her out? Why don't you write that book? And he couldn't, because he knew too much about all the ways it could fail, all the reasons it might not matter, all the evidence suggesting it was just another manifestation of ego or social conditioning or biological programming. Knowledge had made him functionally paralysed. And here's the second prison bar. When you know too much about how things work, you lose the ability to be enchanted by them. You watch a beautiful sunset and instead of simply experiencing awe, you think about wavelengths of light scattering through atmospheric particles. You feel love and immediately recognise it as a cocktail of oxytocin, dopamine, and evolutionary programming designed to facilitate pair bonding and reproduction. You see a piece of art and can't help but analyse the technique, the influences, the market forces that determined its value, the psychological buttons it's designed to push. But if you speak about this, if you mention that perhaps knowing too much has stolen something from you, you'll be attacked. and I mean this quite precisely, though the attack is usually intellectual rather than physical. You'll be called anti-intellectual, willfully ignorant, someone who wants to put the genie back in the bottle. You'll be told that knowledge is always good, that understanding is always better than not understanding, that you're romanticizing ignorance. But if you stay silent, if you keep pretending that all this knowledge has only improved your life, you begin to lose contact with the truth you can feel but can't quite articulate, that something precious has been traded away, and you're not entirely sure it was a fair exchange. This is cognitive dissonance of a very sophisticated sort. I remember reading a book about happiness research, about how humans are terrible at predicting what will make them happy, about how most of our desires are manufactured by advertising and social comparison, and for a while, I felt liberated by this knowledge. Now I'll stop chasing the wrong things, I thought. But instead, something else happened. I stopped being able to want anything without interrogating it. Do I actually want this? Or is this just social conditioning? Is this desire authentic, or is it manufactured? Will this actually make me happy? Or am I falling prey to the same prediction errors everyone else makes? And this brings us to the third prison bar, perhaps the most insidious one. When you know enough about human psychology, when you understand the mechanisms of desire and belief and emotion, you can deconstruct yourself right out of existence. Every motivation becomes suspect. Every passion potentially just another delusion. Every meaning you try to create gets immediately deconstructed by your own over-informed mind. This is what I call the paralysis of meta-awareness. When you're constantly aware of being aware, constantly analysing your own mental processes, constantly seeing through your own mechanisms, you become like a centipede trying to walk while thinking about which leg to move first. I've watched this pattern destroy people. The person who knows too much gets trapped. They can't enjoy simple pleasures because they see through them. They can't pursue goals wholeheartedly because they understand their arbitrary nature. They can't form strong beliefs because they know too much about how beliefs are formed and maintained. Notice how this creates a perfect prison. It's not imposed from outside. You can't blame anyone else. It's made entirely of your own knowledge, your own awareness, your own understanding. And the bars are invisible to everyone else who look at you and think, "But you know so much. You understand so much. You should be happy. You should be successful. You should be able to navigate life better than anyone." But here's what nobody tells you. The fourth prison bar is perhaps the most devastating of all. When you're constantly analysing, constantly understanding, constantly seeing through the mechanisms of human experience, you lose the ability to simply be. You can't be sad without analysing why you're sad. You can't be happy without questioning whether you deserve to be happy. You can't be angry without understanding the cognitive processes that generate anger. You can't fall in love without recognising all the ways it's just biochemistry and evolved behaviour. This is exhausting beyond measure. Imagine never being able to have a direct experience of anything. Every moment filtered through layers of knowledge, interpretation, understanding, analysis. It's like trying to taste food while simultaneously reading a molecular breakdown of its chemical composition. I've spoken with people who describe this experience, and they often say the same thing. I feel like I'm watching my life through glass. I understand everything, but I feel nothing authentically. There's always this gap between me and the experience, and this isn't metaphor, this is a real existential crisis. When knowledge becomes so thick that it separates you from direct experience, when understanding creates more distance than connection, you can actually lose contact with the simple fact of being alive. Now you might be thinking, well, this all sounds rather hopeless. Are we all doomed once we learn too much? And here's where we come to something interesting, because the prison I'm describing is only a prison when you don't see it for what it is. When you think the solution is to learn even more, to understand even better, to analyse even more deeply. But once you recognise the trap, once you see that more knowledge won't free you from the prison of knowledge, everything shifts. Not because you suddenly forget what you know, but because your relationship to knowing transforms. you begin to realize that you're not required to analyze every experience. You're not obligated to understand every feeling or deconstruct every moment. You see, the truly imprisoning thing isn't the knowledge itself, it's the compulsion to always be using it. The belief that if you know something, you must think about it. If you understand a mechanism, you must recognize it operating. If you can see through something, you must see through it. This is where the real imprisonment happens, because you're essentially making knowledge your master rather than your tool. Let me give you an image. Imagine you've learned to see the pixels on a screen. You can't watch a movie anymore without noticing them, without seeing the individual dots of light that make up the image. Now you have a choice. You can fixate on the pixels, constantly aware of them, letting them destroy your ability to get lost in the story. Or you can simply allow your focus to soften, to take in the whole image, to let the pixels do their job of creating an illusion without needing to constantly acknowledge them. The pixels don't go away. Your knowledge of them doesn't disappear, but you're no longer enslaved to that knowledge. This is the wisdom that must accompany deep knowledge. The understanding that not everything you know needs to be actively thought about at every moment. But here's the paradox. Once you stop compulsively analysing everything you experience, once you relax into allowing direct experience without the constant overlay of knowledge, your understanding often becomes even deeper. And more than that, life begins to feel inhabitable again, because you're no longer imprisoned by your own awareness. Think of it like this. When you meet someone who knows a tremendous amount but wears it lightly, who understands deeply but doesn't need to display that understanding, who can analyse brilliantly but chooses to simply experience when analysis isn't needed, how does that feel? It feels like freedom, doesn't it? Like finally the knowledge serves the person rather than the person serving the knowledge. This is what deep knowledge can become when it's integrated properly. Not a prison you live in, but a tool you use when useful and set down when it's not. You know things, but you're not defined by what you know. You understand mechanisms, but you don't reduce everything to mechanisms. You see through illusions, but you don't destroy every illusion you encounter. This doesn't mean you become ignorant or pretend not to know things. It means you've stopped making knowledge your identity, your security blanket, your constant companion. I want to be very clear about something. I'm not suggesting you stop learning, or that ignorance is somehow superior to knowledge. I'm not proposing some kind of willful dumbing down. What I'm suggesting is that there's a difference between knowledge as a tool and knowledge as a prison, between understanding that enhances life and understanding that creates separation from life. The prison of knowing too much lies not in the knowledge itself, but in what you do with it. If you use it to separate yourself from others, to feel superior, to justify your inability to engage fully with life, then yes, it becomes a prison. If you use it to attack others for their ignorance, to shame them for their simple pleasures, to punish them for not seeing what you see, then yes, it destroys your connection to humanity and leaves you isolated. But if you can hold your knowledge lightly, if you can know without constantly needing to demonstrate that you know, understand without always needing to apply that understanding, see clearly without always needing to point out what you see, then your knowledge becomes something entirely different. It becomes a resource you can draw on when needed rather than a burden you carry always. Here's what I've learned after many years of watching people with vast knowledge. The ones who suffer most are not the ones who know the most. They are the ones who haven't learned to set their knowledge down, who carry it constantly, who filter every experience through it, who've become so identified with what they know that they've lost contact with the simple fact of being. The ones who thrive, who manage to use their knowledge without being imprisoned by it, they've learned something crucial. They've learned that knowing and being are not the same thing. They can understand deeply without that understanding consuming their every moment. They can analyze brilliantly without losing the ability to experience directly. They maintain what you might call a fluid relationship with knowledge, accessing it when useful but not enslaved to it constantly. And how does one learn this? Well, it starts with spending time not knowing. Real time, not just intellectual humility, but actual periods where you deliberately don't analyze, don't understand, don't figure out. Time where you simply experience without immediately translating that experience into concepts and categories and theories. It continues with learning to trust direct experience again, even though you know all the ways it can be wrong, even though you understand all the mechanisms that distort perception. Yes, memory is unreliable. Yes, emotions are biochemical. Yes, meaning is constructed. All of this may be absolutely true, but the question is not whether you know these things. The question is whether you're going to let these truths prevent you from engaging fully with life. And sometimes, often actually, the wisest thing to do is temporarily forget what you know. Not permanently, not willfully becoming ignorant, but simply setting aside your knowledge when it's not serving you. This doesn't make you intellectually dishonest. It makes you wise, because you understand that knowledge is a means, not an end. Understanding is a tool for living, not a substitute for living. So here we are at the heart of it. The prison of knowing too much is real. It can isolate you, paralyze you, separate you from direct experience, and cause you to lose contact with the simple fact of being alive. But it doesn't have to. Not if you learn to carry your knowledge consciously. Not if you develop the wisdom to know when to use what you know and when to set it aside. Not if you can remember that you are not your knowledge, that being precedes understanding, that life is lived directly, not through the filter of constant analysis. The knowledge and the prison are the same thing. The question is only whether you'll learn to use knowledge as a tool rather than letting it become your cage. Whether you'll develop the flexibility and the wisdom and the self-awareness necessary to know deeply without being imprisoned by your own knowledge, and perhaps most importantly, whether you'll find others who can hold knowledge as lightly as you're learning to, because they exist, you know. Other people who know a great deal but haven't let that knowledge separate them from life, who understand deeply but can still be surprised, who see clearly but haven't let clarity destroy wonder. When you find these people, when you can finally discuss ideas without it becoming a competition or a performance, when you can share what you know without needing to prove you know it, that's when the prison begins to transform into something more like a library, a place you visit when you need something, but not where you live. Because you realize you're not your knowledge. You're not defined by what you understand. You're not reduced to the sum of everything you've learned. You're simply alive. And knowledge, properly held, should enhance that aliveness, not diminish it. This is the hope within the prison, that your knowledge, when held wisely, becomes not a cage that confines you, but a garden you can walk through, beautiful, useful, enriching, but always with the door open, always with the ability to step outside into direct experience whenever you choose. The prison is real, but so is the key. The key is simply remembering that knowing is not the same as being, that understanding is not the same as experiencing, that analysis is not the same as living. And that, my friends, is the art of knowing much while remaining free, of carrying great understanding without being crushed by its weight, of seeing clearly without letting clarity become another form of blindness. The danger is real, but so is the possibility. The possibility that you'll learn to use knowledge without being used by it, that you'll understand deeply without that understanding becoming a barrier to experience, that you'll carry your awareness as a gift that enriches life rather than a curse that separates you from it. And that is the path from the prison of knowing too much to the freedom of knowing wisely,